All right, so I want to talk about the male reproductive system here. So I've got a model here. Um, it's not a great model. It shows some of the key features, but it doesn't show all of them. So let's talk about the external genitalia first. That is the penis here and the scrotum. So the inside of the scrotum, we're going to have two paired testicles or testes. And so the penis itself is going to be made up of a couple of different parts. The major portion of it is going to be the shaft of the penis, and then what most people call the head of the penis is the glans penis. You notice the urethra running in the middle of it. We also have this erectile tissue, which we see here as well as here. So there's two different types of erectile tissue. You'll notice that we have this one here, and then this color is a little different. And basically in the penis, there's like 3 tubes of erectile tissue, 2 on the top and 1 on the bottom. The reason the one on the bottom is slightly different is because remember that urethra is running through it. So as that fills with blood, you don't want to squeeze the urethra because the urethra is where sperm need to move through to get out of the body. So we want to make sure that that urethra is open. So again, 3 different bodies of erectile tissue. One of them is going to be slightly different just simply because it's surrounding the urethra. So let's talk about the scrotum here. The scrotum, once again, has the testes in it, and that is the gonad. The gonad is the testes because they're the ones producing sperm. So the big thing on the testes, remember the ovaries produce eggs and estrogen and progesterone, though the testes produce sperm and testosterone. So within the testes themselves, we have these seminiferous tubules. That's where sperm are produced, and the interstitial cells produce testosterone. So when we talk about sperm production, we want to talk about, well, how does it get out of the body? That's kind of the big thing, right? So when the sperm are produced in those seminiferous tubules in the testes, they're going to move into this tiny little tube called the rete testes, still part of the testes, and then it's going to move out of the testes into the next organ, which is the epididymis. It's not really shown here, but it's usually going to be on the posterior lateral wall, so back side, and that epididymis is going to basically cup the testicles, and that is a coiled tube that's actually going to allow for sperm to mature. It's kind of like where they get their swimming lessons. Once they're mature and once ejaculation takes place, the testes and the epididymis are going to start contracting. That contraction is going to move them into a tube called the ductus deferens or the vas deferens. So when we talk about the ductus or the vas deferens, remember the testicles are on the outside of the abdominal pelvic cavity because we need to keep them cooler for sperm production. So the big thing is we have to get those sperm back into the body and then back out. So the way that it moves is that ductus or that vas deferens moves with the spermatic cord. The spermatic cord is basically a wrapping around the blood vessels, the nerves, and the ductus deferens or the vas deferens that's going to go to the testicle itself. So once that ductus deferens moves, it's going to go through the inguinal canal into the abdominal pelvic cavity, and it's going to arch over the bladder. Once it arches over the bladder, it's going to come right here. So this is the end of that ductus deferens here. That ductus deferens is then going to push that sperm into the ejaculatory duct. The ejaculatory duct is actually kind of in the prostate itself. So this gland here is the prostate. 2 other glands that we don't see are the seminal vesicles. The seminal vesicles would release seminal fluid into the ejaculatory duct. The prostate is going to release seminal fluid into the ejaculatory duct. So the ejaculatory duct is now having sperm and fluid from the seminal vesicles and from the prostate. That is then going to move into the urethra, and there's basically 3 parts of the urethra. There's the prosthetic urethra, there's the membranous urethra, which we don't see. It's the portion between the end of the prostate and the beginning of the penis, and then we have the penile or spongy urethra that's down the length of the penis. So when we're talking about, sperm moving, it goes from the testes into the epididymis, into the ductus deferens, into the ejaculatory duct, and into the urethra. The other gland that we don't see the seminal vesicles, we do see the prostate, but there is one more gland that produces seminal fluid, and that is called the bulbourethral gland. It is actually at the base of the spongy or penile urethra, which is going to be somewhere over here. So we can't see that gland. It's not well defined on this model. But the big thing with it is that it is one of those glands that's producing seminal fluid, but it also produces fluid to remove traces of acidic urine. So if you've ever heard of the term pre-cum, that's basically what it is. It's usually prior to ejaculation as well as during ejaculation. So when we look at these structures, the one thing I want you to notice is kind of where the rectum is and also where the bladder is in relation to all of this. The rectum is going to be back here, okay? This is the bladder here. And so if you notice where the prostate is, the reason that they go and check the prostate rectally is because it's really close. That's the closest region that you can get to. Another thing I want to talk about are vasectomies. So when we talk about vasectomies, what's happening is we are cutting out a piece of the vas deferens, hence the word vasectomy. Vasectomy, it makes more sense to call it the vas deferens than the ductus deferens at that point. So what they're doing is it is a out procedure, so that means that they're not going internally, so they can actually go into the scrotum and they can cut that vas deferens or that ductus deferens basically at the level of the testes. So what that's going to do is it's going to create a hole now in that tube that's moving that sperm. So what ends up happening is the larger portion that they take out, the less likely it is to regrow. And yes, if you have a vasectomy, it could potentially, where those two ends that you have, one below and one above, they could eventually rejoin. And I know people who have had kids after a vasectomy after a couple years simply because it didn't stay disconnected. That tube, that vas deferens, came back together. The other thing with that is it can be reversed. Again, simply because you can actually have it manually reversed, or it could happen accidentally. So again, form of birth control, but it's just the cutting of that ductus or that vas deferens.